chose going to bed early. I made it about midnight last night. Alabama and Georgia football game kept me awake. But anyway, that's my problem, I guess. We are going to try to get through 1 Corinthians this morning, chapter 16. I don't think there's anything controversial in 16, like the speaking in tongues or anything like that, but maybe a little bit, but we'll talk about here in just a second. But the first thing he talks about, he ends up this visit or this letter to the Corinthians, and just a little bit of to get in your mind exactly where Paul is and whatever. But I've got a map up here, but I didn't put it at the very beginning. I should have, and I'll get it to you here in just a minute. But he was in Corinth for 2 years, and he left. He went to Ephesus. He went on back over to Jerusalem, made a little circle, and been right back to Ephesus. And he's been there for a while. I don't know exactly how long, but while he's in Ephesus, he's writing this letter back over to the Corinthians. It's not very far. It's just across the sea there. I forgot which one it is. But when you sail out of Corinth over to Ephesus, and that's where he went when he left Corinth. You remember he left with Aquila and Priscilla, and they came over to Ephesus. But anyway, we'll talk about them here in just a little bit too. But first of all, he says, now about the collection for the Lord's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. So we should be able to go to somewhere else and see what he told them to do, but I don't think it's recorded anywhere, at least on commentaries or whatever. I couldn't find it anywhere, but I don't know what he told them, but evidently he told them the same thing he's getting ready to tell them in Corinth, because he says, well, let me back up a second. Paul was determined, there was a goal that he had to collect money from the Gentile Christians to help the Jews who were in Jerusalem, the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. And why, I guess, why was that necessary? They were getting ready, they were experiencing a great famine throughout Judea. And they were certainly hurting because of that. We can go back to Acts chapter 11, and 4 or 5 verses here says, during this time, some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them, named Agabus, stood up and through the Spirit predicted that a severe famine would spread over the entire Roman world. This happened during the reign of Claudius Caesar. The disciples, as each one was able, decided to provide help for their brothers and sisters living in Judea. This they did, sending their gift to the elders by Barnabas and Saul. In Romans 15, it says, now, however, I am on my way to Jerusalem in the service of the Lord's people there, for Macedonia and Achaia were pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the Lord's people in Jerusalem. They were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings, they owe it to the Jews to share with them in their material blessings or their material possessions. 2 Corinthians, getting ahead of a little bit, says, now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing this service to the Lord's people. So I guess I've got one more. There is no need for me to write to you about this service to the Lord's people, for I know your eagerness to help, and I have been boasting about it to the Macedonians, telling them that since last year you and Achaia were ready to give, and your enthusiasm has stirred most of them to action. So Paul has been all around preaching and asking for them to help the poor people in Jerusalem, the poor Christians in Jerusalem, the ones who were probably suffering because of the famine. The map, I don't know, it's maybe too little for you to see, but he talks about Achaia, he talks about Macedonia. All of you remember the Macedonian call. Up here we have Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, Athens and Corinth were in Achaia, and Galatia is in this area here where Paul first preached his first missionary journey. So all these people are mentioned in these verses that I just read, and he has been through that area, and he'd asked them to help. And he mentions this to the Corinthians, I guess, for the first time in this first letter. But some of this that I read was after the fact here. But anyway, just to show that he had asked them to do that, they did that, and they were welcome. I mean, they were glad to do that. They welcomed the opportunity to do that. Well, yes, sir. 200 miles.
So, right across the ocean there, it's going to be close to 500 miles.
Yeah, it would be. From here's Corinth, and over here is Ephesus. Here's where Paul is right now. This would have been a long trip back over here, but he went over and back, and he's back over here right now writing to the church over in Corinth. So that is about that's probably close to 200 miles. A little less than 200 miles to sail from Corinth over to Ephesus. Amazing how they got around back in those days. I mean, that first missionary journey here took, I forgot, 3 or 4 years, but to get around by foot and then to sail. I mean, you didn't get on a speedboat, you sailed, and it took some time. That's the most amazing. No GPS.
No roads really, or whatever.
Yeah. No GPS.
It's amazing.
Easy to get distracted, so they had to be dedicated. There was a lot of distractions on the way.
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of distractions. I won't forget when we were there, when you travel from Athens over to Corinth, just a real short distance right here, but one little place you go by huge mountain, just a bluff, and there's enough carved out there between the ocean and the bluff for the road. And a lot of times to travel from Athens to Corinth, they chartered a boat and went around because there were robbers and thieves there, and you couldn't get by them, like the troll at the bridge, I guess. You couldn't get through. So there are a lot of challenges for any kind of travel at that particular time with robbers and thieves and everything. It just amazes me how they were able to get around. And Paul's over here in Ephesus, and Timothy and some of the others they're back up in Macedonia, and he's wondering when they're going to get here. And it's just amazing, isn't it? Today you could text them and be no problem. But anyway.
Good thing they had the cloud, or they never got out of it.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess the techniques they had for sailing, of course, used the sun, the moon, the stars, and all that. So, but it's truly amazing. Good points. He tells them on the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. So I want you to gather some money together to help these poor people over in Jerusalem, the poor Christians over in Jerusalem. And the way you do that is what? Don't wait till I get there. Don't wait till I get there. If you wait till I get there, then you're going to have to scurry around, and it's going to be hard to get it all together. But on the first day of the week, you lay by in store how much?
According to what you make.
According to your ability.
Is that the same thing as our collection today?
That's the only example we have, I think, that I know of.
Example.
That's the only one I know of, yeah.
If you remember the TV evangelist of the 50s and 60s, one of the things that a big part of their
the buckets.
They wait until he came and then they collected. That's another story.
Under the old law, how did they determine what they gave? The tenth. They tithed, didn't they? They didn't have any choice. You had to do that or else. You had to give 10% or else. And we know that the Jews, the Pharisees were so precise in this, they would split something or other to make sure that they got enough and didn't get too much. So now it's different. Now it's different. Is that better or is that worse?
They gave more than just a tenth of their money. I mean, their crops, they separated, they,
10% of everything,
we
yeah.
think 10% of a paycheck.
Right.
They gave 10% of,
I think that was just for the priests in that, wasn't it? The 10% was for the, was to,
Support the temple.
support the temple.
Yeah, that's how they did it. And of course, you know, a lot of religious people today, of course, carry that forward and still insist on 10% tithes and all that. And obviously, we don't do that because we don't have any mention of that in the New Testament other than what they did here.
They don't know about Ananias and Sapphira.
No, not yet. No. No. Ananias and Sapphira would have been okay with what they did, wouldn't they, if they hadn't lied about it? They lied about it. So what was their problem, of course. But well, I don't think we have any other example for giving. On the first day of the week, these are Christians. On the first day of the week, you contribute based on what you have, based on what your income is, or based on your ability, and it could be 10%, 1%, 20%, I don't know. It could be whatever, of course, but that's left up to us. And it's not my business what you do, or not your business what I do, but it's God's business, of course, what we all do, so.
One stipulation on that is you do it cheerfully.
Yeah, okay, that's you give it cheerfully. You give it a cheerful heart. A cheerful heart. You don't do it begrudgingly. When you write that check on Sunday morning, you don't say, "Man, I'm sure I hate to do this." You do it because if you've been fortunate enough to have the money to give, that's what you need to be thankful for, obviously.
Church needs to survive.
Yeah.
A lot of people they might not think like, well, if the pastor runs the church, how does everything, all the bills and stuff for the church get paid and all that stuff?
Yeah.
He has his own income and he has his own house that he has to pay for.
He wouldn't.
Wow, how hard is that on him? So
This
that's what it's for.
this was the need they gave it for at this particular time, and of course, we've evolved that to basically using common sense to use it for whatever, what we have to in order to continue doing what we're doing, and I don't know what else to say about it other than.
Back then in the book of Micah, where that stuff was mentioned, to tithe and see what I'll do if I won't open up the windows of heaven, that there may be meat in my house. So when God said that, I think it's more than just to support the temple. If you come to God's house, then God provides for us. And, if people are poor or this or that, they come to God's house, they can be helped. They can get food if they need food. That there may be meat in my house. I think it was for that also.
We think about the widow in the mice, and she gave everything that she had.
Percentage-wise, she gave more than any of the rest of them, right?
She gave
Yeah.
more than anyone.
Yeah. If you've got $1 and you give 10 cents of it, you've given more than people that's got a lot more that give a lot more, obviously. It's all, I guess, based on percentage, but that's left up to you and God. That's not left up to me. It's not left up. And so God leaves it that way, obviously, rather than everything was strictly based on a law under the old law. You do this or else. This or else. Now it's left up to our conscience. It's our because we do it because of our love. It's just different, and each one of us has a challenge to determine, what that needs to be. Then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you approve and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. And if it seems advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me. So we will get some men together, and we'll all approve of them, and they'll take it, and you don't have to worry about me stealing it or someone else stealing it or whatever. And if it's possible, then I'm going to go with them. So, and we know that looking ahead, Paul did go with them. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings. This is from Acts 24, later on 17, when Paul was appearing before either Festus or Felix, but I believe it was Felix. And when he tells them that I hadn't been to Jerusalem for a while, but the last time I came to Jerusalem to bring these gifts. So it seems like that Paul was able to go with the men who were bringing those gifts. Anything else you want to say?
I think that's rather interesting that he was gone for so long and, collecting all these offerings of money, all that just to help out the poor in
Yeah.
Jerusalem. I mean, imagine someone doing that today. It's inconceivable.
Paul's desire, he was the apostle to the Gentiles, and the Jews hated the Gentiles, obviously. But Paul was so determined to show his Jewish brethren that these Gentiles were sincere, that they were Christians and they were willing to help. Otherwise, you get outside the church, the Jewish-Gentile relationship would be one that one would not pull the other out of a mud hole. But Paul was determined to show the world that Gentiles were indeed brought into God's fold, just like the Jews were. And the Jews were the ones who had to be convinced of that. So if I'm a Jew over here in Jerusalem starving to death, and these Gentiles bring me something to eat, then my attitude's going to change a little bit toward them, maybe, right? That's what it was all about. Paul was determined that that was going to happen. And that's what he was doing here. All right, he discusses his future plans with them before this letter ends. After I go through Macedonia, I will come to you, for I will be going through Macedonia. Macedonia is Philippi, Berea, not Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, and that area that they just came from before he came down to Athens. I had it on the map there just a second ago. After I go through Macedonia, I will come to you, for I will be going through Macedonia. Perhaps I will stay with you for a while or even spend the winter, so that you can help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not want to see you now and make only a passing visit. I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits, but I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost, because a great door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many who oppose me. If you studied ahead a little bit, what's happening in Ephesus that Paul's talking about here? And I won't say anything except Demetrius, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Demetrius, the silversmith, you remember him? This is what's happening to Paul in Ephesus, probably or supposedly about the time he's writing this. This is what he's referring to here. But I don't guess you can prove that, but the timeline fits in pretty well with that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later, because as soon as we get through this letter, then we're going to jump into that. When Timothy comes, see to it that he has nothing to fear while he is with you, for he is carrying on the work of the Lord just as I am. Well, why would he need to write that? Do you suppose?
I think he had been in prison. I think he just got let out.
Timothy? No, I don't think that's so. He's what? Timothy? Timothy was the one who was what, half and half? Okay. That's still not what I'm thinking. Timothy had been sent up to Macedonia. Remember when Paul went on down to Athens, Timothy and whoever else was with him, I forgot now. But anyway, he stayed up at Macedonia. So Paul has sent instruction to him to come down to to Corinth. But Timothy was a young person. Probably the reason that he's telling them to respect him. If he came in just as a teenager, I don't know how old he was, but he was younger, they wouldn't have a lot of respect for him maybe. They wouldn't pay any attention to him. When Timothy comes, see that he has nothing to fear while he's with you, for he is carrying on the work of the Lord just as I am.
Is that because he was young?
Pardon?
Is that because he was young?
Well, that's what I'm assuming. I don't know that. I'm assuming that.
I remember somewhere where it said, "Let no man despise that youth."
Yeah, that's what he's talking about, Timothy, right? No one then should treat him with contempt. Send him on his way in peace so that he may return to me. I'm expecting him along with the brothers. Now about your brother, Paul's expecting him to come from Macedonia to Corinth and over to Ephesus, obviously. So don't mistreat him. He's there for the same reason I was there. He's there to help. So I don't know why there would be any reason for them to treat him with contempt other than the fact he was just a kid, quote unquote. Now about our brother Apollos. I strongly urged him to go to you with the brothers. He was quite unwilling to go now, but he will go when he has the opportunity. And I have no clue why Apollos didn't want to go when Paul wanted him to go. Apollos does go to Corinth. We'll see that a little bit later. But why he didn't go then, I don't know. Remember what happened with Apollos? When Paul left Corinth after 2 years, he sailed to Ephesus with Aquila and Priscilla, and Paul stayed a few days and left, but Aquila and Priscilla stayed in Ephesus. And then they ran into Apollos. And Apollos was preaching. But what was he preaching? He was preaching. Huh? Yeah, he's preaching the baptism of John. He hadn't been made aware that Christ had died, and now things are changed quite a bit. So Apollos, again, the lack of communication. Apollos was preaching the baptism of John, which is what they preached until the church was established on the day of Pentecost. So Aquila and Priscilla got Apollos off to the side by themselves, and they explained to him the way more perfectly. And of course, obviously, Apollos was glad for that and was receptive to that. And from that point on, Apollos went about preaching the updated version, as Dale said. You all the time updating your phone or your computer. What? A lot of change had been made, yeah.
When you first changed from the old to the new, and all this coming apart, and they couldn't keep up with it.
Well, the lack of communication too. I mean, here Apollos was out running around the country preaching the baptism of John, which was what he should have been doing when he first heard about it, obviously. But whenever the change came, he was not aware of it yet. And this had been a while, because Paul, he'd been in Corinth for 2 years. Can you imagine?
Just like you said, the way they had to travel.
Yeah. Think about this. Paul had made the first missionary journey, and then the second one was when he came back to. He got the Macedonian call, and then to Athens, to Corinth. 2 years there, over to Ephesus, back to Ephesus. But when he leaves Corinth after 2 years, that's when he meets Aquila and Priscilla, meet up with Apollos. So it'd been at least 3 or 4 years. But Apollos had heard about the baptism of John, and they went about preaching the baptism of John. A lot of people did, and that's what they were supposed to do. And the people who were converted to the baptism of John were fine until something changed. we know that Paul meets the 12 people here a little bit later in Ephesus, and they didn't know anything other than the baptism of John. So what happened? They were baptized by the baptism of Christ, because after Christ's baptism, after Christ's plan went into effect, then John's was outdated. So this is what happened to Apollos. That's a roundabout way of telling that story, but that's strong. And why Apollos didn't want to go at that particular time to Corinth, but he does later. Why he didn't want to go then, it doesn't say. Yes, sir.
I think it's kind of interesting how, the baptism of John, just to begin with, because it was never seen in the Old Testament, anything about that, being baptized, that I remember. And then the baptism of John came, but then it changed again with the coming of Jesus and, the death and resurrection.
Yes, sir.
And, in the New Testament, we're supposed to be baptized.
In the New Testament, you what?
We're supposed to be baptized.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's kind of, that part, like between the two, is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Preaching the baptism of John, maybe like a prerequisite, like, when Jesus does come, at least you'll be baptized anyway. You already have that done before.
Well, he was the forerunner of Christ. He was proclaiming that the Messiah was coming, and he was getting them ready, I guess, getting them focused on what was getting ready to happen.
That is what it is. It's just to get the baptism already be done, and then all they have to do is receive the gospel. That's it.
The baptism of John was for remission of sins. You're aware of that? It says that. The baptism of John was for remission of sins. So if you were a disciple of John and were baptized with the baptism of John, and you died before Christ came, then you had done what you were supposed to do. But if I preach to you the baptism of John today, then I'm a false preacher, because that's not the way it's been updated. I like what Dale said. It's been updated. It's been updated. Yeah.
There's no remission of sins until Christ's blood was shed anyway, right?
Well, that's true. That's generally true. But it says the baptism of John was for the remission of sins, and that was before Christ died. That's a tricky one. That's a tricky one. I forgot what the verse is. John 4:4, I believe, isn't it?
The blood of animals is rolled of sins forward.
Yeah. That's the way it worked under the old law, but it was changing. It was in a process of changing, and let's see. I'm not sure about that. I think it's John 4:4. Nope, it's not it. I'll find it.
But it was for
There's some verses in Matthew, are you looking for a specific verse?
Yeah, that says the baptism of John was for remission of sins. It's in John somewhere.
it's in there somewhere.
I think I do remember reading that.
It's in there. I'll guarantee you that.
I think the Old Testament, that's
Baptize you with water unto repentance, that's Matthew.
Yeah, that's what we normally think, but it also says that the baptism of John was for the remission of sins. All right, our time's out. I need to be going. So I appreciate all of your comments, and I'll tell Sean I didn't get through with this chapter exactly, and you can finish it up next month. What? Nothing? Okay. All right, Doug, you want to say our closing prayer this morning?